kind of thinking about it and wondering why Vincent invited me to be the last speaker when you've heard everything so far today. So what can I tell you? I've no idea. I guess he invited me because I was the guy who put all his bitcoins in Mt. Gox and lost them. I was the guy who got hacked on Bitstamp. I was the guy who got ripped off in an ICO recently. And, I thought it was shitcoin. But I stuck with it. I was the guy who was part of investing in the decentralized autonomous organization, and that was fun. But I stuck with Ether. Why? Because there's so much other things going on that those bad headlines are just a few bad headlines. That a little bit like, if because of Brexit the pound tumbles, does that mean that the pound sterling is still non-existent? It's going to go away? It's still here. Well, this week. We'll see what happens after Theresa May's speech today, which is going to be tough, interesting. Yeah. We're still looking for a prime minister. If anyone wants to volunteer, it's quite easy to get there. So the reason why I've stuck in there is that obviously something is happening. And what's happening is that we are transforming the world. And it's not blockchain that's transforming the world, it's digital that's transforming the world. And I get really irritated because I talk to a lot of banking people, and I know they don't get it. And the reason I know they don't get it is that they talk about digital as a channel. And they've got a chief digital officer, and they've rolled out a fantastic mobile app. And that's nothing to do with what's happening in the world right now. Because what's happening in the world right now is that we are connecting everybody in real time in a very cheap way. And we've never had that before, because what's been connected before is being really expensive, and it's not easy to do business with banks. That's the reason why 2/3 of this planet doesn't have a bank account, because banks deal with people in a very expensive way through physical structures built in the Industrial Revolution, focused upon buildings and humans and paper. And what we're doing is, in this digital revolution, not rolling out apps, we're rolling out a completely open-sourced financial system. And you have to have that system to support the Internet of Things. I cannot imagine having my things having to transact through my bank app, because it would be ridiculous, particularly when my things are transacting non-stop 24/7, and I've got a lot of things on the internet already. I'm going to have even more things on the internet tomorrow. And with 7 billion people having things on the internet, maybe they average 5 things on the internet, that's 50 billion things transacting in real time, non-stop, all day long, trillions of times per day. Will they do that through the SWIFT network? I don't think so. They're going to do it through a distributed ledger, which has to be built, and it has to be agreed. And that's part of our challenge right now. What are we building, and what do we agree upon? Because there's an awful lot of arguments going on. There's an argument going on around, should we use Bitcoin or Ether? You'll have your own opinions, but the prices have been rising dramatically for all the reasons that we know about and you've heard about today. And in particular, the fact that we can now raise a lot of capital for new ventures to build new things for the digital revolution, using structures that are digital structures, which is what we need. But equally, what about Zcash? Or what about Ripple? Where's your money going? What do you bet on for 10 years from now to be the structure of tomorrow on blockchains? We don't know, because it's just experimental stuff. We're just building something and we're getting there. But we don't know where we're going to be in terms of where it's all going. We just know there's choices, there's methods, there's structures, and we have to understand them, get to grips with them, and incorporate them. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, is to try and get people to articulate, particularly in a bank's boardroom, what the difference is between the basics. Like, what's the difference between a blockchain and a distributed ledger? Ask a bank's leadership team, they have no idea. Should they? I think they should. Mainly because banks are technology companies building the Internet of Value for the Internet of Things, along with fintech startups in a co-creative, collaborative structure. I think most banks' leadership teams are fatally flawed because they're run by bankers. 94% of the leadership teams in the banks are bankers. They understand risk, compliance, audit, money, have no idea about technology. And building an open source financial Internet of Value without any leadership that understands what that is going to be or how it should work seems a little bit dumb to me. We need to work on that. And then I think the most interesting part, and I know you've touched on this a lot today, and I know that Dave Birch talked about it for 2 hours, so you got a lot of insight from him, in digital identity. And digital identity to me is the number one prime area of focus for distributed ledgers, because that will be the core structure for the Internet of Value. You cannot have an Internet of Value if I have no idea what things you own and whether you've authorized them to transact. I have to have an identity scheme that tells me what are your things and what have you authorized them to do. But self-sovereign digital identities and how they work is going to take a lot of time to agree them. It's not just a simple thing. If it was a simple thing, we would have done it years ago. A little bit like clearing and settlements. That's number one use case ING just touched upon. And the reason clearing and settlement comes up as a big use case is because there was a paper by Oliver Wyman saying that we could save $20 billion a year by putting clearing and settlement on a blockchain. They didn't say what blockchain or how it would work or whether it's a distributed ledger and which currency would underlie it and how it would actually interact and who the counterparties are. And what does it mean for central securities depositories and central banks and central counterparty clearing and the actual banks that are involved in the whole structure globally? We've got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. But there's a few leading lights that I see doing leading work. And in digital identity, there's a few companies that are doing interesting things. And one of them surprised me. They came up to me recently and said, we're focusing on digital identity for Know Your Criminal. KYC, as most of us know it. And the reason is that right now, there's $1.7 trillion of money being laundered through the banks every year, of which only 2% is tracked and traced. Because it's paper-based. And it's really easy to print off a utility bill and an address and say, that's me. To create a passport or a driving license and say, that's me. That's actually not good. And that's the reason why there's so much money being laundered through the financial system. Using distributed ledgers, this company believes, and they're led by a person who's formerly one of the big banks' head of compliance and anti-money laundering, that 90% of laundering will be tracked and traced because it's digitalized. And digital makes a huge difference. That's why the Dubai government intends to have all of the government's documentation on a blockchain by 2020. And knowing Dubai, they probably will achieve it, because Dubai achieves a lot of things overnight. If you haven't been there lately, they actually recently built a 3-kilometer canal through the center of the city. And they just did it in 18 months. And it involved lifting up the motorway, which they just did. You know, Dubai does this stuff. So Dubai having everything on a blockchain by 2020 is quite likely. What will they have? Identities, along with government contracts and government benefits and everything else that governments do. And I think the reason why we stay on identities, the area that excites me the most is actually not this room or this country or this geography, to be honest. Although I am European, even with my accent. America and Europe are legacy infrastructure regions because we built everything before the internet came around. What really excites me is China. I was stunned when I see the figure last year that between Ant Financial and WeChat, $5.5 trillion was paid in mobile apps in China, compared to 112 billion in the USA. So 50 times greater in China, the volume of mobile payments, because they didn't have credit and debit cards. They didn't have that legacy infrastructure. So they've leapfrogged overnight. But the countries that are really leapfrogging everybody are in sub-Saharan Africa, Indonesia, Philippines, in areas where people were not banked, where they didn't have access to internet and financial systems, but they now have a mobile phone in their hand, connecting everybody globally. This is the digital revolution. 7.5 billion people having access to the network. And what they need in that network is a cheap and free and easy way to transact and trade, using a cheap and easy authentication system based on a distributed ledger, which will be their identity through their SIM card and maybe through a biometric on a distributed ledger system. That will be created in the next 15 years, probably in the next 5. How it's created, how it will run, he knows, Mr. Birch. I don't, because he gets it far more than I do in terms of digital identity. But what I do get is that if we can crack that one nut that will transform our planet overnight into a truly digital planet connecting everybody and everything. Thank you.
A guy who basically is ready before his time. Do you want to even out with the other English or what?
Why would you disagree with Chris?
Yeah, why would you disagree with Chris Kidder? Is there anything he said which you disagree with? Because that's what we like to discuss.
I actually disagree with myself quite often. I have arguments with myself. I'm fairly schizo.
Yeah. I mean, your blog is just amazing. I mean, if you subscribe to his newsletter, you get unbelievable amount of articles about, just like the whole fintech industry and the whole technical sector, etc. But I mean, so I don't know how you do it. But I mean, you were, the last time I saw you, you were a little tired of the blockchain, right? Just like, I mean, Dave was just being skeptical and basically got on tangent. You were getting tired. Basically, we heard from Gartner that it's now, we're in the delusions phase, where we already passed it. But do you see real changes being implemented? Are we getting ever out of that experimenting and this hopefulness phase?
To an extent. I mean, the reason why I was a bit tired of blockchain when I last saw you is because it's reached a point where everybody was saying, we're putting a blockchain thing in. And it just became stupid because they didn't know why they were putting a blockchain thing in. Blockchain will solve child poverty and world hunger and homelessness and reform the planet. It can't do everything. And so I think it just went through that hype cycle, which we again saw on some of the charts. 2015 in particular, where everything was writing about it. And then it kind of went into the trough of disillusionment. And
when will we get out of there? I mean, do you really have to go to Dubai? Do you really have to go to Dubai to come up with exciting examples?
I said there's waterfall effects. That first of all, it comes from the internet of value being built by the banks and fintech firms. Then it will roll into the institutions that work with the banks, the corporates and governments. Then it will roll into the main street, the consumer. But to get to the consumer, you're looking at 5 to 8 years of development cycles between financial institutions, fintechs, governments, and corporates. Having said that, some things are already in the consumer's hand, things like Abra. And if you don't know Abra, it's a Bitcoin-based remittances corridor startup that's now in over 50 currencies, I think, that basically allows you to pay money from developed economies to emerging economies for almost free. It's one of the cheapest transfer systems in the world. And all it's doing is converting everything into the Bitcoin blockchain behind the scenes. You don't see that.
No.
So there is some already out there in consumers' hands. And it tends to be in emerging economies.
Yeah, so what we saw, I mean, I don't know if you were here with Link Talk, but he said what kind of blockchain he was building and how because they don't have all these legacy systems, there's innovation coming from that department. But
there's also a key thing around what's happening in China. So I'm a big fan of Ant Financial, and the main reason being is unlike Tencent, but Tencent is starting this as well, and Baidu.
WeChat.
Ant Financial has launched itself out of China into becoming a global player, working with Wirecard and Ingenico here, working with First Data and MoneyGram in the States, and also lots of alliances in Philippines and Thailand with different players. And Eric Jing was at the World Economic Forum in January and said that Ant Financial will have 2 billion users by 2025 by distributed ledger and artificial intelligence technologies investments. He didn't go any further in terms of what he meant by that. But I'm going to find out next month in Hangzhou. So I'm going down for a week.
One other thing. I mean, how long have you been in this whole banking industry?
About 5 years.
Yes. And you're a young dad. Well, if you now look, how many people have a bank account by now?
Worldwide, it's about 2.4 billion.
Yeah. So way less than mobile phones.
Yeah,
right?
Way less.
And there's 3.5 million people with a smartphone.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've tried to show you all, if you download this Jax thing, DAXX, and then I hope that during the drinks you basically ask me more money because I still have 800 euros to give away. But if you see how easy it is to download the app, get 2 bank accounts, an Ether and start trading, and to give people a digital money identity and start doing that. Isn't that really inspiring technology for our systems, which are, in the Netherlands are fantastic. We have real good, everybody has a bank account, it's really cheap, it works. But isn't that something which is exciting for our future and make it much better to work with?
It completely is, but I still take one step back and just say, at this point in time, if I need to be a computer scientist to be able to use these capabilities, and I'm not saying you have to be, because there are apps out there that solve it. There are the apps out there that solve it.
Who's tried Jax now? Who's tried Jax? Who has installed it? Okay, who thinks it's quite a difficult thing to operate?
Who
thinks it's quite easy?
I didn't finish what I was saying, Vincent. Which is, as tweeted, I think, by Mr. Birch. The guy who accepts Bitcoin in India has only had one transaction, and the whole time he said that we accept Bitcoin. If you don't get the mainstream out there, then it won't take off. And the mainstream not only has to have easy apps, but they have to have regulated apps. That means if they've got value stores in there and they're stolen or hacked, that they're protected.
Yeah, well, India did a nice little, acceleration policy thing, right? Changing the whole money system, and just flying in new. That was a nice way to accelerate the digital acceptance of coins. No, but they just did that. That was an amazing thing. So I hope that, being your normal English skeptical that we need to wait 8 years, you're probably right, but I hope we can accelerate it a little bit. And
thank you very much for coming. Like your Tesla does.
Yeah, accelerate like my Tesla. We need to go in that. Thank you very much, Chris, coming all the way.